before sunrise on a mild summer morning in June 1995. A 27-year-old television news anchor named Jodi Huisentruit hurriedly left her apartment in Mason City, Iowa, headed for work. But she never arrived, and her disappearance has never been solved. In 2003, two television news reporters created FindJodi.com, a website dedicated to preserving Jodi's memory and keeping her case alive. This is the official Find Jodi podcast. Welcome back to the Find Jodi podcast. I'm Scott Fuller. On this episode of the podcast, we'll be taking a virtual journey inside of Jodi Huisentruit's apartment complex. The abduction of Jodi Huisentruit on June 27, 1995, by all available evidence, occurred in the parking lot outside of her apartment complex. But over the years, and now more recently with the airing of a 2020 special covering Jodi's case, questions persist about the inside of Jodi's apartment. What glimpses of her life and perhaps her disappearance can be gleaned from where Jodi lived? Find Jodi team member Caroline Lowe joins me for that discussion coming up next. Caroline, one of the major response points that we've received at Find Jodi since the airing of the 2020 special, it's now been just about a month since that aired on ABC. I think it was interesting, a little bit surprising to me, that one of the things people want to know more about and talk more about is the apartment, inside of Jodi's apartment itself, and what is known or what's not known about that. Obviously, the abduction, from all evidence, happens outside the apartment in the parking lot, very nearby the front door, but inside Jodi's apartment unit, actually, you thought it would be good to revisit that as a post in a podcast to tackle a bunch of these different things at once. So that's what we'll do in this episode.
Sure.
One of the first things that people bring up about the apartment is video that was shot originally by the CBS affiliate in Minneapolis, St. Paul, where you worked for many years, WCCO. A reporter and a cameraman gained access to Jodi's apartment, and that video is online. But there are a couple of very important things to know about that 55 seconds of video. We know it's inside of Jodi's apartment. We know it was taken relatively soon after Jodi disappeared, but it's worth noting exactly when that was taken to give people an idea. It's not like this video that we see online, that 60-second clip, was taken the day after.
Exactly. As you said, it's a 55 seconds of video, and I recently spoke with a photographer who shot the video. WCCO was given access about September of 1995. They were working with a PI, working on a story for WCCO that aired later that year. And they did get permission to go in the apartment. In fact, the narration you're hearing is actually the reporter with the key, opening the door, walking in, describing what he's seeing in the apartment. I think a lot of people who have seen that video, which was posted after the 48-hour show 3 years ago, mistakenly thought it's crime scene video. Some people think it's an investigator walking in, taking you through to see, if you will, what an investigator saw. It's not that at all. Again, it's video that was shot months, probably 3 months, 2 to 3 months after Jodi was abducted, after many people, including police, Jodi's friends, family, one coworker we interviewed some time ago, Amy Coons, mentioned the investigators had her come in and go through Jodi's closet, trying to find out what outfit Jodi was likely wearing that day, what was missing from that closet. So a number of people were in that apartment after the police were done with processing it.
So that video is taken a couple of months later. We have no idea how many people have been in and out of the apartment since then. Obviously, police investigators, friends and family, you would assume as well. And when you look at that video, it is useful in certain ways. Here's the layout of the apartment. Here's where basically furniture was. You obviously see some of Jodi's possessions still, mostly probably where they were. But we need to constantly keep in mind with that brief video, there are things that were there that are not there now. And we're also probably seeing things that are there that weren't there then.
Well, just one small example we've heard from several people about the Pepsi can that you see by the sink. And as JoAnn, Jodi's sister, said, Jodi didn't drink Pepsi. And presumably that can was somebody who'd been through and had not tossed it. So things like that, I think people tend to hyper-focus, thinking again that it's probably crime scene video, that this is the way it looked that morning June 27, 1995, when Jodi was last there. That is not the case.
Yeah, can't draw firm conclusions based on that. There are other cans in the kitchen area. There's another Pepsi can. You see, when police are processing the scene on that morning in June 27th, 1995, another example of this is some of the officers are holding Pepsi cans themselves as they're going through the parking lot. But we don't know if that's evidence. We don't know if they're drinking Pepsi and just happen to have one there.
Exactly. I think the significant thing police can get from being in the apartment initially, obviously, is looking for any clues. As much as it appears the whole crime occurred in the parking lot, you look for any clues that could tell you, were there any messages there? Were there any notes? What is in there that might be related to the crime? In bigger picture, the police do what we call victimology. You try to get to know a person's life in depth. And part of what you do there is you go through photo albums. You look for cards, notes, try to piece together who this person was. Is there anything in that person's life that could be connected to what may have happened? Recently, I went through copy of Jodi's photo album again, and what struck me when I first looked at the photo albums last summer with JoAnn is Jodi kept so many photos, and she had very detailed notes on the back of the photos. She had dates, comments, oh, what a fun time, that kind of thing. That was very much Jodi, so I'm wondering what kind of things that investigators may have gleaned from that. As we talked about before, I was surprised in the photo, going through the photos, to find a picture of a young man who was visiting Jodi, according to Jodi's notes, in February 1995, just a few months before she disappeared. He was wearing a University of Wisconsin Stout sweatshirt. Nothing more there about him, but he's sitting there on a couch, plant in the background that we've seen so many times where Jodi is at. Who is this guy? Did they learn any more about him? Other things we learned looking through the photo albums is one guy is there throughout the years, and that was her boyfriend, Jodi's boyfriend in high school and college. He's the only person we consistently see in there appearing to be in a romantic relationship with Jodi.
Again, that photograph was in one of Jodi's photo albums. It's dated. As you mentioned, Jodi takes very detailed notes sort of on the back of her pictures. So it's dated February of 95. You mentioned the sweatshirt, UW Stout. But what's otherwise interesting about this guy, I guess, is we still don't know who he is.
No, we've shown the picture to several friends, and nobody seems to be able to identify him. But there are other things there. You came across the message of the note regarding Jodi's hair appointment. That was for that day. Maybe you can elaborate on that. Yeah, the video, as it's walked through by the cameraman and the reporter in Jodi's apartment, it's focusing on things that they, as they're walking through, seem interesting to them, like the golf clubs and some of her athletic gear, and then it zooms in on the phone message, the answering machine, and there's an appointment card. And years ago, I tracked down, using that video actually, I found the stylist, Jodi's hairstylist, who was in Clear Lake, and didn't want to be interviewed or speak on the record, but he did confirm that there was to be an appointment on the 27th, later on that day. And my recollection, he told me the first he heard that anything was wrong that day is when Jodi missed her appointment. The appointment, we think, probably would have been for the wedding that she was going to go back home and attend that weekend. Right. She was heading up, we believe, on Thursday to Long Prairie for one of her best friend's weddings. So presumably she was getting her hair done in preparation for being a bridesmaid. And speaking of the video, the CBS video of the apartment and what the camera zooms in on, at the very end of the video, it zooms in on toothbrushes. And there are multiple toothbrushes in the bathroom. And the implication by the photographer there almost seems to be, this doesn't make sense. There are multiple toothbrushes in the apartment of a woman who lived alone. We have to wonder why they're there, what we're looking at exactly. So what are some of the possibilities of those toothbrushes? Because we want to assume, obviously, those are Jodi's toothbrushes, and why are there so many of them? She lives by herself. I think this is one of those examples where seeing something doesn't necessarily give you a clear answer. Were those toothbrushes, and some people think they see 2 brushes, others think they see 3. Were they Jodi's? One would expect, certainly nowadays, that investigators would have taken those brushes with them to test potentially for DNA, saliva, that kind of thing. So we don't know if they're Jodi's. Now, I've talked to other friends of Jodi's who said that she was very conscientious about her oral hygiene, that it was not unusual for her to have 2 toothbrushes. Hard to know. Could it have been somebody visiting? Could there have just been a couple there for guests? We just don't know. But I think it's so tempting to jump in, again, thinking this is the crime scene. This is what Jodi had that morning. We don't know. And they may be Jodi's toothbrushes, and they may not have been taken as evidence. That's possible. If they're not Jodi's toothbrushes, who else could they belong to? And one maybe possibility is in those months
after Jodi disappeared. There's the looking for her, and then she's got an apartment full of possessions too. So friends and family would have been down to the apartment. From the Sauk Center area of Minnesota, it's a 4-hour drive, so maybe that was an overnight trip. That's a possibility too. Right in front of you is video. It's like, here, she had three toothbrushes. We can't even take that for granted in this case.
Exactly. Or there's also the possibility she had 2 and one that she used as a travel brush. I know I've done that. One that I take for overnights and I keep it there. So really should not overly zero in on what that means because we don't know.
Since the 2020 episode a month ago especially, because it's mentioned there again in the episode, it's been brought up a lot. Investigators say Jodi's toilet seat in the bathroom of her apartment was in the up position when police entered the apartment, or was found up by investigators. This was first revealed by Frank Stearns, who's now retired, Mason City Police Department, who made that claim for the first time to my knowledge in 2009 on an episode of the Disappeared series. And it's been very well mentioned, very often mentioned in Jodi's case since then because of the obvious inference there that a raised toilet seat must mean that a man was very recently in the apartment. And you and I have talked in episodes past about other possibilities for that. Possibly Jodi being sick, possibly Jodi cleaning the toilet, less likely to me, but also somebody after Jodi disappears, maybe an officer, somebody raising the seat and leaving it up, and a different investigator finds it up.
It's really kind of a mystery to me why it finally came out. A lot of information has kind of dribbled out over the years, but it's not something that came out in the first 14 years. It was 14 years after Jodi disappeared before a Mason City investigator publicly put that information out there. What we don't know is if they dusted the toilet seat for prints. Presumably, if it caught their attention, they would have done something like that. We don't know if they took the toilet seat off to do more testing. It's one of those things that the investigator mentioned it. It was mentioned again in the recent special, but we don't know what happened with it. Just as there's also a couple of wine glasses mentioned that were in Jodi's sink. We don't know if they were tested. Even in the 2020 special, I believe the investigators said they don't know if they were from 2 different days. Jodi's sister said she wouldn't be surprised if Jodi wasn't using them to drink water, if she'd used up her other glasses. But that's certainly something that intriguing. Doesn't mean she had company. We also had a quote years ago from a police chief at the time saying there was no indication she had anybody at the time. So granted, things sometimes change over the years. So what the police chief and investigators might have said in those first few days certainly could change as they get more information. But it's another one of those kind of intriguing clues that may or may not mean anything.
Another thought I had when watching the 2020 special on the wine glasses is Investigator Prohaska of Mason City Police. He's currently the lead on the case for the agency down there. He says, for the first time, confirming beer cans and wine glasses in the sink, which had been long rumored but never really officially official. And that he does say, as you mentioned, we don't know if Jodi drank from them on that night or on different nights. And this might be an overread on my part, but I thought, wait a minute, does that mean they know that she drank out of both of them? But
I would hope that they would have explained that a little more clearly, which they did not, because we do know from day one that practically that they told us that there was a partial palm print taken from the car. Why not, if they did obtain something, why not say that versus we found these? Or is it because they weren't tested back then? It's hard to say how processed it was. Again, the focus was on downstairs. It was outside in the parking lot, 12 feet from Jodi's building. That's where I think everything pointed in terms of a crime occurring. At the same time, another investigator mentioned on a podcast a few months ago, someone not related to this case, said he would have hoped that they would have dusted Jodi's door in case somebody might have gone up and listened in her door. Did they dust the door? Did they dust any walls? Anything that, in the hallway that somebody might have touched?
But in all these questions that we got about the apartment, I went back for the first time in a while and looked at that 55-second video. And it's amazing how you can look at things who knows how many times and miss certain things. For example, there are, in Jodi's living room area, there are picture frames that are empty of pictures, it looks like. You can't really see anything in high def, certainly in that video for 95. But to me, it looks like they're newly bought picture frames, and Jodi would have had an idea if she put them there, what she wanted to put in those new frames, but there are no images in the frames. There's no photos in the frames, which is
certainly seemed like somebody who was still decorating. I mean, at the same time, we knew from her journal she was hoping to get out of there when her contract expired in the fall. She was hoping to move to a bigger market. At the same time, we saw these frames still with the SOAR sticker on them, indicating that she probably planned to put something in there.
And the other thing I noticed from that video, in watching it again, the video is shot in such a way where it's not a seamless walkthrough. They're different cuts to different rooms. But I realized that the telephone that zoomed in on next to the hat rack, is not next to Jodi's bed. And maybe because of the TV reenactments over the years and how Amy Kuntz has told her story about waking Jodi up, and we've all kind of half sleepily reached over and answered the phone. The phone is not in Jodi's bedroom, at least the phone that's on the video. The phone, I believe, is by the front door next to the hat rack on a white credenza, which is where the answering machine is. But it's most definitely not in her bedroom. We don't know from the video quite enough of Jodi's bedroom to say she didn't have a second extension in her bedroom. Can't quite rule that out, but the phone that's on the video anyway is by the front door. And
right.
You and I have seen that video probably 100 times, and it just never occurred to me that the phone wasn't in the bedroom. What that means, if anything, who knows, could very well just be nothing. But it's a great reminder, in this case especially, that of the material that is out there, you look at things differently, or maybe it's right there in plain sight, the whole time, and you don't realize it just because of your assumptions.
The thing that the photographer and the reporter who's since passed away told me, what stood out about the apartment to them, and granted this was probably about September of 1995, is how normal it looked. It just looked like a young woman maybe going to work that day, just looking around at a very active woman, seeing the golf clubs, her clothing, just that was how normal it all felt. And to think that this was somebody who was at the center of this very disturbing mystery that's still unsolved almost 27 years later.
And I think we've mentioned before, Amy Kuntz, for example, was brought in by police to say what's missing in an effort to maybe see what Jodi was wearing. And you raise a great point about what Jodi might have been wearing that morning, because she has red high heels that are found in the parking lot. It's probably not going to be a bright green top then, so maybe a red outfit, something like that. Also from the video, you see this is an aspiring news anchor who has a big wardrobe, ton of hats, but she's got this very small space to live in. It underlined for me this was a stepping stone for her. This was a temporary situation. She was hoping to move on to a bigger market.
One of the other things that appeared to be missing, which we didn't see in the video, and we don't know if to this day if they've located, is that Ani Cruz, Jodi's good friend, told me that Jodi had two phone books, a newer one and an older one. And when investigators met with Ani, they had the old one that they had retrieved from the apartment, the same place where they also retrieved Jodi's journal. And to this day, we don't know if they ever were able to find that new one. And Ani was only aware that there was a newer one because she had seen it when they had gone on the water skiing trip that weekend, right before Jodi disappeared. So where is that other phone book?
And when you say phone book, you mean address, like contact
address book, exactly.
Yeah.
Address books, personal one. But the address books are always so key in terms of investigators going through, again, the victims, anybody they knew, any people they might want to talk to. And as I said, Ani said she was struck by, no, this is not the phone book that she saw Jodi had in her possession as they were going on the water skiing trip.
And some of the items in the apartment that aren't in the video, obviously, were taken by police, and we know one of those was the journal. Sort of along the lines of seeing things 100 times and not realizing it, but this is actually outside the apartment. But as police are processing the scene, and the newspaper photographer for the Globe-Gazette is across the street taking pictures, in the background, you can see a fence that's on the west side of the property up against the adjacent campground right next to the apartment complex. And in the photo, it looks like the fence is in the process of being painted. Half of it appears to be one color and half of it appears to be a different color. Is a very minor detail. We've been trying to answer the question, who has access to Jodi? And part of that are people that have business being at the Key Apartments who don't live there.
Exactly. And presumably investigators contacted anybody who was a regular maintenance worker, but it could be somebody who maybe was brought in to do a day job or something. We just don't know. And maybe that person could have observed Jodi. Well, I know when you and I were down in Mason City this fall, we spent quite a bit of time at the apartment complex. And I remember ourselves observing a maintenance worker who was just in for a specific assignment. And he came up and approached us. He was looking for the manager of the building. And that really reinforced to me, who is this person? Could there be a person like that back then who at some point in the days leading up to Jodi's disappearance had observed her, knew the building, knew how to get access? Remember, the building was not locked. Could it be somebody like that who's never been on the radar? And I don't think until we know whatever evidence is out there until somebody's charged. I don't know how we can not rule out that as a possibility.
And if a white Ford Econoline type van is involved, as Randy Linderman says he saw at about that time on that morning, that could go in line with a contractor or a company truck, something like that. Also, a Building B resident who's now deceased, Vic Koenigsberg, has said that he came home about 3 o'clock in the morning of the 27th. He had odd hours as a railroad worker, and he had a note under his door in Building B that they were going to do work on his furnace filter. They were going to change his furnace filter. And that would have been on Tuesday or Wednesday, according to Vic Koenigsberg. So it's an apartment complex. There's maintenance that has to be done year-round on a pretty regular basis, and to pinpoint that work being done 27 years later is pretty difficult for us now.
Exactly. And we've talked before about apartment complexes. There tends to be kind of an anonymity, whether it's residents not knowing each other as well as people coming and going that might have worked on the place. And you have to wonder if there's any possibility that somebody like that could have anything to do with what happened to Jodi.
Aside from things like the diary that police took and probably your obvious things, but when you think of inside the apartment, what does it mean to you in terms of importance in the case or any possibilities that you'd want to share?
I think we won't know the importance of what we've seen until we know what happened. You can look at things, they might be meaningful, they might be irrelevant, but it's really hard to know what any of it means. And I think it's really important for anybody looking at that specific video, the 55 seconds, to know it's captured some of Jodi, her lifestyle, but it certainly was not the complete picture. And remember, that was not crime scene video. This was TV news video from WCCO in Minneapolis, probably 3 months later.
In terms of somebody being in her apartment, aside from the toilet seat and aside from whatever inferences people want to draw from toothbrushes or whatever's in that video that was 2 months after the fact, there's no indication that Jodi had a guest of any kind that night.
Exactly. One other thing that's come up from time to time is the fact that Jodi's bedspread was pulled up. And some people have taken that to mean that Jodi's bed was made in the morning, and why would she make her bed in the morning? And I just want to reinforce from talking to Rose Tobin, her apartment manager, and others, that there's no indication Jodi totally made the bed. It was probably the covers pulled up as she's running out the door, and I don't find that unusual. Some people have found it like, why would she take the time if she's running late to do that? I don't find it unusual at all to think, it's myself running late, that I'd pull the covers up just because I do that before I go to work. So I wouldn't read into that, but many people have done that think it's something significant.
Another item from the video that I noticed was the golf clubs being by the front door, by the credenza, by the telephone. And Jodi had just used those golf clubs, obviously, earlier in the day. And that only stuck out to me because I'm an avid golfer, or try to be. And once my clubs are in my car for the summer, I try to keep them there because you never know when you might be able to sneak off and you don't have to haul them around. But we don't even know if Jodi removed them from the trunk that day. I've always wondered if she took the time when she came home from the golf tournament to change clothes, came home the first time before she went to the social event at the country club, if she would have taken the time to open the trunk and bring her clubs inside. And the video might answer that question. But you pointed out to me that maybe the clubs were taken from the car after it was taken as evidence by police, and they were put back in the apartment so the family could have access to them later on.
Well, exactly. And we also don't know exactly how many months after Jodi was abducted that her car was returned to her family. One of Jodi's friend's moms drove the car back. In fact, she said she had to drive it all the way back to Long Prairie without the key, because it kept the key, as you remember, the bent key for evidence. So she had to go all the way to Long Prairie. I would think that they very possibly took the golf clubs out and left them in the apartment. But again, we don't know.
So when it comes to that video, it's tough to trust because there's missing items that police would have taken. There are items in that video that were not there on June 27th, 1995. We know that for sure. And I think what we want to get across when it comes to the toilet seat, potentially very important. When it comes to the beer cans and the wine glasses, we only know about these things what police have said. And when you look at that video, this is not a detective filming the scene. This is taken by media months afterwards.
Right. I think the main thing you get is a little bit of a glimpse into a young woman's apartment. This is where Jodi was. These were her clothes. These were her golf clubs, some very basic things. But beyond that, I don't think you can safely make any more assumptions that they mean anything or have anything to do with what happened to her.
And we welcome your thoughts and opinions and feedback on this in every podcast episode. We'll post the email address for the whole team in the show notes for this episode.
just hope someday we have the answers, and it'll be interesting to go back and look at the video again when we do know what actually happened. And if there's anything you see in the video that has anything to do with what happened to Jodi.
FindJodi is a nonprofit run by volunteers with a mission of keeping Jodi's unsolved case in the spotlight. Anyone with information about Jodi's case can reach out to the Mason City Police Department. Information can also be provided to the Iowa Department of Criminal Investigations. You can also contact FindJodi anonymously if you prefer. Don't sit in silence. The time to talk is now. For the entire FindJodi team, I'm Scott Fuller. Thank you for listening.